Today at 6, the new Conservative leader is Rishi Sunak. He'll be the youngest Prime Minister in Britain for 200 years. Minutes after being elected by Conservative MPs, he ruled out an early general election and warned his party they had to unite or die.
We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together.
His last remaining challenger, Penny Mordaunt, had left the race a few minutes before the official announcement was made.
We have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party.
Politics comes at us rather fast these days, doesn't it? This autumn's second new Prime Minister inherits a nightmarish soup of political and economic gloom. His task starts now.
Yes, we'll have more from Chris in this extended edition of BBC News at 6 as we consider the prospects for a Sunak premiership. At Westminster, the main opposition parties are united on the need for a general election so that millions of voters can have their say.
Labour thinks that we should be having a general election. I think everybody who I've spoken to, the public, have said we should be having a general election. There is no mandate now.
He should call an early general election. He's the second person in a row to be appointed as Prime Minister by Tories, not elected by the population.
Mr Sunak's rapid advance is a significant moment for politics, and he's the first British Asian to become Prime Minister. And we'll be asking voters who are deeply concerned about the rising cost of living for their thoughts on the new Prime Minister.
What do you want right now?
A government we can trust, a government we can depend on, a government that's going to get things right and not going to screw us over.
On BBC London, reaction from the capital as the country gets a new Prime Minister. Plus, Bond Street Station finally welcomes its first passengers on the Elizabeth line.
Good evening. The new leader of the Conservative Party is Rishi Sunak, who's expected to be confirmed as Britain's new Prime Minister sometime tomorrow. Mr Sunak is the first British Asian to head the UK government, and at 42, he'll be the youngest Prime Minister in over 2 centuries. Mr Sunak's victory was confirmed this afternoon when his last remaining challenger, Penny Mordaunt, dropped out of the race just a few minutes before the nominations closed. Mr Sunak will be succeeding Liz Truss just 7 weeks after she defeated him in the previous contest. And he takes office at a time of deep economic trouble, with Labour and the SNP, the Lib Dems, other opposition parties all demanding an immediate general election so that voters can have their say. First this evening, let's join our political editor Chris Mason at Westminster.
Huw, as you say, it was just 7 weeks ago today that Liz Truss was elected Conservative leader. She became Prime Minister a day later. Today, 49 days on, Rishi Sunak is elected Conservative leader. We expect he will become Prime Minister tomorrow. This is politics on fast forward. It's only 4 days ago that Liz Truss resigned, and now more change beckons. Today's new Conservative leader, this week's new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak arrived at Conservative Party headquarters this afternoon, his party's third leader this year. Waves, smiles and handshakes done, he wanted to talk to the country, but didn't want to face questions from reporters.
I'd like to pay tribute to Liz Truss for her dedicated public service to the country. She has led with dignity and grace through a time of great change and under exceptionally difficult circumstances, both at home and abroad. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to. The United Kingdom is a great country, But there is no doubt we face a profound economic challenge. We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together. I pledge that I will serve you with integrity and humility, and I will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people.
All weekend and into this morning, this woman, Penny Mordaunt, wanted to stand as well. She had until 2 o'clock this afternoon to find 100 supporters. Just after 1, they reckon they were just a few short. But with minutes to go, one of her biggest backers was having second thoughts. So here we are at 1:30, half an hour to go. Penny Mordaunt's campaign grappling for every possible vote, and you've fled the ship.
Yeah, I think there's plenty. I mean, there's 100 others, and I totally understand the legitimacy of arguing that the party membership should have the say. It's a difficult call, but I just think in the circumstances where division in the Conservative Party costs money, it increases the price of money, it puts interest rates up, the statesmanlike thing to do, I think, is to get together today. And Rishi and Penny will work together, can work together. I just think, why not do it now rather than wait 3 days?
Half an hour later, an official announcement imminent and a statement from Penny Mordaunt. Our party is our membership, whether we are elected representatives, activists, fundraisers or supporters. We all have a stake in who our leader is. These are unprecedented times. Despite the compressed timetable for the leadership contest, it is clear that colleagues feel we need certainty today. They have taken this decision in good faith for the good of the country. Rishi has my full support. And she added, we all owe it to the country, to each other and to Rishi to unite and work together for the good of the nation. There is much work to be done. And a few minutes after that, confirmation of another new Prime Minister.
I can confirm that we have received one valid nomination.
I wasn't allowed to talk to you from inside the results room, but was watching downstairs as it happened.
And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party.
It's quite astonishing, isn't it, that the guy who was defeated by the current Prime Minister is replacing her a matter of weeks after she took office. The Conservatives' rivals say it's time for a general election.
They can't just keep doling out prime ministers every month because they're in total chaos and they've lost control of the market and haven't got any ideas of how they're going to tackle the cost of living that people are facing.
He's the second person in a row to be appointed as Prime Minister by Tories, not elected by the population. The idea that he can go 2 years before seeking or winning a democratic mandate, I think, is just unthinkable.
People are sick and tired of this Conservative chaos, and that's why the Liberal Democrats are calling for a general election to be called right now.
This building has seen much down the centuries, the generations, and rather a bit in just the last few weeks, posing some sharp questions for those who govern us. What do you say to our viewer who comes to the reasonable-minded conclusion that it's been a complete shambles?
Well, no one would want to see what we've seen over the last few months. It's been difficult, it's been painful. I've been dealing with my international counterparts with all the challenges going on around the globe. And of course, what they want is they want the UK government, they want Britain to once again be the rock of stability.
Because they've been laughing at us, haven't they? I mean, overseas we've become a laughing stock.
Well, what's going on? I mean, no one's going to defend what's gone on over the last few months. It's been painful, it's been brutal, but now it comes to an end.
Autumn's second new Prime Minister, the third to call this place home this year. The era of Rishi Sunak, for however long it lasts, beckons.
Well now, Chris, can we start by asking a bit about the race? Because, of course, the race came to that conclusion today. The manner of the victory, how would you describe it?
Well, it's an extraordinary political reincarnation for Rishi Sunak. Just a matter of weeks ago, the man defeated, the man considering what his future might look like, the man jetting off to a beach to try and recuperate after a bruising and losing campaign. And yet here he is, a matter of weeks later, about to prepare to move in to 10 Downing Street after an unconventional race to become the most powerful politician in the land. Why unconventional? Well, it's been rattled off in a matter of just 4 days, pretty much entirely behind closed doors. All we have seen or heard from Rishi Sunak was a statement on social media the other day saying he was having a tilt at the top job, and then that statement delivered to camera this afternoon without reporters being able to ask him any questions at all about exactly how he might choose to govern. So he inherits the mantle of office at a tremendously difficult time and will face big questions about how he's going to approach it.
As you say, Chris, the only thing we have to go on today is that rather terse statement in some ways, which he delivered earlier. What clues were there in there about what he intends to do?
Well, he said he would govern with humility, which sounded like a little pop at his most immediate predecessor. And there was a bit of a pop at Boris Johnson in there as well, in the kind of coded language he chose. What we have to do is look back to his agenda from the summer when he was campaigning against Liz Truss for the leadership to get some sense of how he might govern. And then he was all about economic stability. He felt that Liz Truss's programme for government would be a disaster, and he'll be able to point to some vindication for that view. But how does he approach the challenges of the now? I think probably where Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, has been is broadly where he's likely to be economically, but of course it's not even guaranteed that he will keep Mr Hunt in that post, with that economic statement expected just a week today. And then crucially, what will be his instincts as far as government spending is concerned, with the expectation there will be squeezes on plenty of government departments. He will face some monumentally difficult decisions, and they'll confront him from day one.
Chris, for now, thanks. We'll come back in a while to talk about those demands today for a general election. But for now, thank you. Chris Mason there. Well, as Chris mentioned, one of the remarkable things about Mr Sunak is his rapid rise at Westminster. He's been a Member of Parliament for just 7 years. He was elected by the voters of Richmond in Yorkshire back in 2015, and he's the youngest Prime Minister of modern times. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, has more on the Sunak story.
Addressing the nation during a pandemic a month after becoming Chancellor, Rishi Sunak was the face of the government's economic response during this national crisis.
To all those at home right now, anxious about the days ahead, I say this: you will not face this alone.
The furlough scheme paid 80% of millions of people's salaries for months and cost billions.
Hello.
He also masterminded the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, encouraging diners back to restaurants when they reopened.
There we go. Brilliant.
Thank you. I've worked with Rishi for some time, and I would say everyone knows that he's smart and competent, but he's also incredibly dedicated, really hardworking, and just a really kind person. And I saw how much effort he put into coming up with things like the furlough scheme, coming up with all of those packages of support for business, and I think everyone has seen that.
Big boots to fill, lad.
All of that came just 5 years after he was elected as the Conservative MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire. His parents, of Indian descent, came to the UK from East Africa. He's spoken about the sacrifices they made to send him to Winchester College, a top private school. After Oxford University, a career in banking and his marriage to the daughter of a billionaire made him extremely wealthy. Political opponents have commented on his expensive houses, clothes and shoes, suggesting he's out of touch with ordinary people. The revelation that his wife had non-dom tax status proved politically toxic. He said he'd informed senior civil servants when he joined government, but a U-turn followed.
She's always followed all the rules, but she recognises this goes beyond just following those rules, so she's decided to pay both UK and foreign taxes.
The episode was a low point for Rishi Sunak. He was visibly angry at what he saw as an intrusion into his wife's financial affairs. Colleagues, though, felt that it betrayed a certain political naivety, and some even predicted that his career would never recover.
Rishi Sunak is a long-standing Brexit supporter, but as Chancellor he rarely trumpeted the benefits of leaving the EU. He got caught up in the scandal about Downing Street parties, receiving a fine for breaking COVID laws. Friends say he just turned up early for a meeting in the cabinet room.
Tackling the costs of transport.
There'd been rumours of tensions between him and Boris Johnson over spending. After a number of scandals, Mr Sunak resigned in protest. He was blamed by Mr Johnson's friends for bringing him down.
Please welcome Rishi Sunak.
When he stood to be Tory leader in the summer, he warned that Liz Truss's tax-cutting agenda would lead to higher interest rates for the government and homeowners.
Liz, your plans, your own economic advisor has said that would lead to mortgage rates, interest rates going up to 7%. Can you imagine what that's going to do for everyone here and everyone watching? That's thousands of pounds on their mortgage bill.
A few weeks ago, Rishi Sunak was rejected by Conservative members. Today, colleagues have decided he's the man to bring stability. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So as the UK prepares for its third Prime Minister in the space of 7 weeks, of course after a period of extreme political turmoil, and the new Conservative leader wasted no time today in warning his party that it faces destruction unless it pulls together. Much of the focus will be on some of those constituencies which switched from Labour to Conservative at the last general election. Our correspondent Alex Forsyth is in Wakefield in West Yorkshire, a seat regained by Labour at a by-election just a few months ago.
The political landscape has shifted once again, while voters, like those here in the cathedral city of Wakefield, could but watch.
122.
Dennis, who's backed the Conservatives before, runs a local sweet shop. He welcomes the party's latest choice of Prime Minister, but after recent economic turmoil, doesn't see easy solutions.
Quite a clever fella, actually, probably one of the cleverest guys. I'd probably give him a chance. See what he does in 18 months, but he's got an uphill task.
Not far away, this community centre is in a residential area with high levels of need. For Bernie, the manager, there is frustration at how events in Westminster have unfolded.
Whilst the Conservative Party have been navel-gazing and looking at their own self-interest, communities like this have been forgotten and not prioritised, and it's bordering on criminal. I'm not confident that the new Prime Minister will deliver. It doesn't feel very democratic right now.
In the city centre, some share a similar sentiment.
Rishi Sunak is going to be the new Prime Minister.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We need another general election. Needs a swing door on number 10.
It's all a joke though, isn't it? I'm a single mum and we're all struggling financially. We just need to get the priorities in order.
What do you make of what's been happening in Westminster?
I don't think it's been right good, if I've got to be honest. One thing after another, isn't it?
It just seems a farce, a joke. I mean, there's no real leadership.
This was one of the seats the Conservatives won from Labour at the 2019 election when Boris Johnson led the party, but they lost it in a by-election earlier this year. It shows how the party's electoral fortunes have shifted and lays bare the challenge facing Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister.
Conservative Party member Wahida says recent political chaos has had an impact on the doorstep. She's now hoping for some stability.
The people we're expecting to lead us are just leading a circus. It's become embarrassing and it's hard to defend this as local activists.
What do you think about Rishi Sunak?
I think he's great. All this bickering and this sniping, it's got to end because it's not a good look.
Back in the city centre, Tanya runs her own candle shop and says the uncertainty hasn't helped business, but she's prepared to give the incoming Prime Minister a chance.
If he can show his teeth and get the taxes sorted, I don't mind paying tax as long as it's going to help the economy and get us going.
Would you have faith that Rishi Sunak would be able to do what you wanted, make things more stable?
I think after what's just happened with Liz Truss, hopefully, is it third time lucky?
The Conservatives might hope they've bought themselves a window to restore public faith. It could be narrow. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Wakefield.
Well, shortly after Mr Sunak's victory was announced, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, congratulated him and expressed the hope that they could have a constructive working relationship. But she also demanded an immediate general election and a rejection of any more austerity measures. Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing the reaction in Wales. That's with Hywel Griffith, and in Northern Ireland with my colleague Chris Page. But first to our Scotland editor, James Cook in Edinburgh.
Yes, and Rishi Sunak has previously made it clear that he intends to continue trying to block a second referendum on independence, that he wants to increase scrutiny of the Scottish Government. Well, as you say, Nicola Sturgeon did congratulate him. She said his election was a significant and important moment for British Asians, but she said she would be taking no lessons from him on scrutiny, said he had no democratic legitimacy in Scotland. Ms Sturgeon had some advice, friendly or otherwise, saying that Rishi Sunak should call an immediate general election and should not impose another wave of what she called damaging austerity on public services and families. Now, the Scottish Conservatives, well, they know that the recent weeks have been pretty difficult for the party here and that those difficulties have been largely self-imposed. Their leader here, Douglas Ross, said this had been a difficult and unsettling time for his party and the nation as he congratulated Mr Sunak. Polls, well, they suggest that what has happened as a result of this turmoil is that some voters in Scotland have shifted potentially from the Conservatives to Labour, but the SNP remain pretty static and a way ahead, and on independence, well, the nation on that remains more or less evenly divided.
Well, the First Minister of Wales, Labour's Mark Drakeford, congratulated Rishi Sunak this afternoon, but at the same time took a rather unsubtle swipe at both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. His statement said that he looked forward to working constructively with Mr Sunak in a way that his predecessors didn't allow. We know over the last 6 weeks that Liz Truss hasn't even spoken to Mr Drakeford. So will Rishi Sunak be willing to pick up the phone this week as PM? Well, even if he does, don't expect that relationship to be repaired. When he was here in Cardiff in the summer during the leadership contest, he said he wanted to challenge Labour's record in charge in Wales, particularly on key issues like education and the health service, claiming that NHS performances in Wales was worse than anywhere else in the UK. And there's also likely to be rows if, as most people expect, there are cuts to come. In fact, the Welsh Government has already started claiming that it's a lack of UK government funding that's stopping it from achieving everything it wants to do. So those tensions can only increase as we edge closer to a general election.
Well, when Rishi Sunak takes over as head of the government in London, he'll have the task of trying to restore the devolved government here at Stormont. The Democratic Unionist Party says it'll continue to block the formation of a power-sharing coalition until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK is scrapped. There's no sign of that happening soon. Now, this Friday marks the legal deadline for a devolved government to be formed following the election to the Northern Ireland Assembly back in May, when Sinn Féin overtook the DUP to become the largest party. The current Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has said, as things stand, he's going to call another Stormont Assembly election, probably to take place on the 15th of December. Now, of course, there are questions over a possible cabinet reshuffle. People are wondering, could Mr Heaton-Harris be replaced by someone with different ideas? It's worth noting, though, that today a junior minister in the Northern Ireland office, Steve Baker, said the plan to call an election would remain regardless of events in London. This was one matter, he said, where there would not be a U-turn.
Chris, many thanks. Chris Page there with the latest thoughts for us at Stormont. Well, Rishi Sunak's success in becoming party leader and then Prime Minister is being seen as highly significant for British politics, and especially so for the large community of British Asians. Mr Sunak, who was born in Southampton, is a practising Hindu of Indian descent. His grandparents migrated from East Africa back in the 1960s. Our Midlands correspondent, Navdesh Johal, has been speaking to British Asians in Leicester about the significance of this moment.
2 years ago, this was then-Chancellor Rishi Sunak, a practising Hindu, lighting candles outside 11 Downing Street to mark the start of Diwali during lockdown. Today in Leicester, home to one of the biggest Diwali celebrations outside of India, preparations were underway for this festival marked by Hindus, Sikhs and Jains, symbolising the spiritual victory of light over darkness. The city also has one of the UK's largest South Asian communities, and many feel this is a moment loaded with personal significance. How do you feel about Rishi Sunak? These young British Asian students from De Montfort University are of different faiths, but they agree on one thing. So who here thinks that Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister is a positive thing for ethnic minorities in the UK?
It's the first person of colour as Prime Minister in the UK, following on from, various different countries, first in South Africa with Nelson Mandela and then Barack Obama with the US, and, now it's us.
You think it's that significant?
I think it is that significant, yeah.
I'm not sure if it is a major step, as he's not been voted by the general public. I think if he was to then possibly call a general election and then stand, then maybe we get more of an idea of how it sits.
The significance of today will be felt across the generations, including among those who knew a less diverse Britain. Lord Billamoria is the owner of a successful beer business and an independent life peer in the House of Lords.
I've seen in front of my own eyes this glass ceiling being well and truly shattered, with this country becoming a country of aspiration and opportunity for anyone regardless of race, religion or background. And here's the ultimate example of a person of Indian origin, a British Asian, born in this country, becoming Prime Minister of this country. And it just shows this country is just phenomenal. It's a true meritocracy.
Well, things are getting busier in Leicester ahead of tonight's Diwali celebrations. Despite recent issues, this city has been held up as an example of diversity in Britain working pretty well over the years. And it's in that context that many believe we are ready for our first British Asian Prime Minister.
British society has changed significantly, and there's a high degree of tolerance now, notwithstanding a significant minority of the population for whom there is a degree of resentment and opposition to this diversity. And in that sense, I think Britain, like most Western liberal democracies, is ready for Rishi Sunak as a Prime Minister.
Amid the pride felt by many South Asians in the city, there is also trepidation. The scale of the challenges faced by Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister leaves perhaps little time to truly savour this moment. Huw, this street is at the centre of tonight's celebrations, and speaking to people here earlier, there was a range of views. One young woman said to me that she felt conflicted because she didn't like Rishi Sunak's politics, but an older gentleman said to me that if he'd spoken to him and said 45 years ago when he arrived here from India that somebody of his background would go on to become Prime Minister, he would not have believed you. It highlights, I think, the point that British Asians aren't a homogenous entity. There is plenty of pride being felt today, but that pride perhaps depends, the extent of it, on age, socioeconomic background and also political persuasion.
Navdesh, many thanks again. Navdesh Johal with the latest thoughts there for us in Leicester. Well, the backdrop to much of the turmoil of recent months, of course, has been the sharp rise in the cost of living, especially in relation to fuel bills, and the mixed efforts of Conservative ministers to deal with that. Away from Westminster and the internal machinations of the Conservative Party, there are millions of voters with very real concerns about the months ahead and the prospect of higher interest rates too, adding to mortgage repayments. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has been speaking to people in Haywood and Middleton. That's a constituency in Greater Manchester which turned from Labour to Conservative for the first time at the election of 2019.
How to fix British politics and restore order. Rishi Sunak is celebrating, but he'll need answers for people struggling in places like Haywood. Some will be harder to win over.
How do you both feel about the state of the nation right now?
That's the best.
Everyone here voted Tory in 2019.
I think it's right, we voted for Boris Johnson and nobody asked us to vote him out and he should have still been in.
His own MPs told him to go.
So, they're all backstabbers. Rishi Sunak is a backstabber.
You have a cup of coffee, please. And could Rishi Sunak get your vote?
I don't know. I don't think I'll be voting again after what happened to Boris Johnson. So.
Really?
Because my vote doesn't matter anymore.
Sai also opted for Boris Johnson in 2019.
Sum up how you feel right now.
Dismayed, disillusioned by the Tories.
Now, this is what he wants from Rishi Sunak.
A government we can trust, a government we can depend on, a government that's going to get things right and not going to screw us over.
But for many here, money is tight and life is tough. In a town promised levelling up and better times only 3 years ago.
I think it's beyond fixing, to be quite honest now. I have cancer. I'm on 4-week waiting lists to be seen, and it used to be 2 weeks when I first started, now it's 4 weeks. I have a child with special needs who had to go into a different town to go to school because there's no school facilities for her, etc. So it's just bad.
Austerity has already squeezed Northern England's towns and cities, and more could be on the way.
You have to find ways of coping, don't you? I mean, what else is there? But I don't know. I think there is a lot of people struggling. I think people have just lost faith now, haven't they?
Down the road in Middleton,
This is our food pantry.
the Lighthouse helps people in need.
It's a club, it's a membership club, so they join.
Every week, 80 families use this.
And for their £3.50 a week, they can get, on average, about £32.85 worth of food.
There's also emergency food parcels handed out.
Rice.
Today, it was Nadine and Faye who found themselves in crisis.
Just had nothing left.
In the cupboards?
Yeah, bare it was.
Rising bills meant they couldn't eat.
It's stress every day, isn't it? Where's your next meal going to come from and things like that?
Basically in a silent war. The poor are like angry at the rich having what they have, and it's not that. It's just a vicious circle, isn't it? I feel scared of the world right now.
Soon, big political decisions will be made at a time when many need a helping hand. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Middleton.
Well, having seen that, let's go back to Westminster and our political editor, Chris Mason. Can we tackle this question head on, Chris? Lots of people saying today, you know, there needs to be an election because voters haven't had a say in yet another change of Prime Minister. Now, how is that debate likely to develop?
Yeah, I think there's a curiosity here, Huw, that many people now have a presidential mindset in a parliamentary democracy. Because remember, technically, at a general election, we vote for a candidate who represents a party, and the party that assembles the most seats, the leader of that party, chosen by that party, becomes the Prime Minister, even though you may have been primarily motivated to vote for that party by the person who happens to lead it at the time of the election. And that's where you get this tension between people there talking to Ed, saying, well, hang on a minute, I didn't vote for Rishi Sunak. Well, he is now the leader of the Conservative Party, which won the last general election and can command a majority in Parliament. And look at recent history. I was just looking back at this whilst watching the programme tonight. Gordon Brown, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and now Rishi Sunak all became Prime Minister between elections. Now, two of them, Theresa May and Boris Johnson, went on to fight elections and carried on in Downing Street. The point I'm trying to make is it is not atypical for this to happen, even though some might find it uncomfortable. The opposition parties will continue to argue for a general election. They only happen if either the Prime Minister or a majority in Parliament want one. Conservative MPs right now, looking at the opinion polls, most of them really don't.
Chris, we'll talk again later. Thanks very much. Chris Mason with the latest thoughts at Westminster. You can get all the latest updates, news and analysis on the next man to be Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, or of course you can get all of the content on the BBC News app. Now you're watching an extended edition of BBC News at 6 because of the events at Westminster. It's 33 minutes past 6. Our main stories this evening. Rishi Sunak will be the UK's next Prime Minister after winning the Conservative leadership contest. His only challenger, Penny Mordaunt, withdrew from the race just before the result was announced. From health and social care to the economy and immigration, we'll be taking an in-depth look at some of the pressing issues in the new Prime Minister's in-tray.
Later on BBC London, the drive to get more children in the capital vaccinated during half-term holidays. Plus, the small space making a big difference. The red phone box helping with the cost of living.
Let's look then at some of the day's other main news. The head of Russia's foreign spy service, speaking exclusively to the BBC, has denied that Moscow is provoking fears about nuclear weapons in its war with Ukraine. Sergei Narishkin, who's director of the British equivalent of the MI6, was speaking at the head of Russia's armed forces, alleging that the Ukraine intends to detonate a so-called dirty bomb. That's a device that combines conventional explosives and radioactive materials. Mr. Narishkin repeated the claim as he spoke to our Moscow editor, Steve Rosenberg.
He's not only Russia's spy chief. Sergei Narishkin heads the Russian Historical Society too. And he's here to remember one of the most dramatic moments in history. When Khrushchev and Kennedy sparred in the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago, and the world came dangerously close to a nuclear apocalypse. A chance for me to ask about the Kremlin's current nuclear saber-rattling. Will you categorically rule out using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, I ask. He dodges the question, but points a finger back.
We are, of course, very concerned about Western rhetoric regarding the possible use of nuclear weapons. It is simply unacceptable. And yesterday, our defence minister telephoned his counterparts in Turkey, America and France and told them about the possible plans of Ukraine's leaders to use a so-called dirty nuclear bomb.
But there's no evidence of that, I say. And I'm asking about Russia's nuclear rhetoric. Do you admit it's been happening?
No, absolutely not.
The evidence suggests otherwise. Days before the Russian invasion, President Putin oversaw massive nuclear drills. And since then, several times, he's dropped unsubtle hints that he would be prepared to use a nuclear weapon in the Ukraine conflict.
And what about Moscow's claim that Ukraine is about to explode a dirty bomb and then blame it on the Kremlin? Well, the British, American and French governments have issued a joint statement rejecting what they call Russia's transparently false allegations against Kiev, adding that the world would see through any attempt to use this allegation as a pretext for escalation.
As for the Cuban Missile Crisis, Stas Namin's grandfather was the Soviet official who helped end the standoff. He fears nuclear rhetoric can lead to catastrophic mistakes.
I don't think it's a real danger that somebody will decide to push the button. But it's not the matter of decision of one person, it's a matter of even mistake. But the result will be the same.
Compromise diffused the missile crisis. So far, though, Vladimir Putin has shown little desire for that. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
More than 70,000 staff at 150 universities could go on strike after university and college union members voted for industrial action. They were balloted on two separate issues, pay and working conditions and cuts to pensions. University employers say that a pay rise would put jobs at risk in what they say are very difficult financial times. Now, the building of tens of thousands of new homes in England and Wales could be delayed or even abandoned because of high levels of pollution in rivers. Scientists say that phosphorus is getting into some rivers from intensive farming and sewage outflows. Tougher targets for phosphate pollution mean that fewer houses can be built. And our correspondent, Wira Davis, has been investigating.
Running for 130 miles from the hills of Mid Wales to the Severn Estuary, the Wye is one of the most ecologically diverse rivers in England and Wales and a natural playground for generations of locals. But beneath the surface, all is not well.
They're going to blast sewerage down the river. Please stay out of the river.
Parts of the Wye have been overwhelmed by pollution, some from sewage discharge, some the result of agricultural activity, with devastating consequences. Now, when human and animal waste gets into a river, not only is it bad for our health, it's also full of nutrients like phosphate, which act like a kind of superfood for the algae. And when this algae gets into a river, it strips the water of oxygen, killing off other plant and animal life. Campaigners say dozens of rivers across the country are similarly affected, But on the why in particular, they say the recent boom in intensive agriculture, especially chicken farms, is partly to blame. Here and on most farms, fertilisers and animal muck are spread on the land under strict regulations. Good for growing crops, but nutrients in the muck can cause havoc if too much gets into the river system, especially in the Wye, which is already overloaded with phosphorus, say scientists.
Where you have these high areas of intensive livestock production, you end up with too much phosphorus available in the manure that's there to go onto the land.
And then there's the growing economic impact. This brownfield development, including affordable homes for local people in Mid Wales, has been shelved because it would add to nutrient levels in the river system.
The planning application is ready for submission, and it has been ready for submission for 18 months or so. Unfortunately, there's the current phosphate situation affecting the River Wye special area of conservation, which means that developments like this can't currently proceed.
Across Wales and England, at least 100,000 homes are affected, delayed or even abandoned because of phosphate pollution targets. In figures checked by the BBC, that's potentially as much as £16 billion in lost economic activity. Farming leaders acknowledge there's a problem, proud custodians of the environment, but they say they have to respond to our demand for ever cheaper food.
There's no simple answer, I'm afraid, because obviously, population growth is such that there needs to be housing developments. At the same time, those people need to be fed as well.
Meeting the demands for cheap food, affordable housing and a clean environment will require everyone working together. At stake, the health of our most iconic rivers. Huw Davis, BBC News on the River Wye.
Well, you can see more on that tonight on BBC Wales Investigates What's Killing Our Rivers. That's at 8:30 on BBC One Wales, but it's also available around the UK on the BBC iPlayer. Well, on taking over as Conservative leader today, Rishi Sunak admitted that the UK faced profound economic challenges, his words. Indeed, the economic situation is significantly worse than it was when Liz Truss took over. Higher mortgage rates, energy bills, inflation combining to make it a really difficult winter for millions of households and businesses. We'll be looking at the NHS and immigration in a moment, but first, our economics editor Faisal Islam looks at the big economic challenges ahead. Faisal.
Thanks, Huw. Rishi Sunak's going to be Prime Minister because of economic instability and a crisis partly the result of his predecessor's misjudgments in this area. He says, as we've been hearing, there are profound economic challenges, so let's have a look. Inflation at 10% right now, a 40-year high already. The energy guarantee limiting the rise this winter. But if that expires, inflation could in the spring still hit 13 or 14%, several times the target. Now, the economy itself is already falling and heading for a 1990-style recession, says the Bank of England, as you can see there. And the core of it all, energy prices, having gone up incredibly, and current levels consistent with typical yearly household bills hitting over £4,000 without that government support. Now, they have come down, which could be the look the new PM needs, but this chart is the price for next winter. The big picture is that most of these challenges are now materially worse than at the start of the original leadership campaign. Some business leaders are concerned.
The first thing it needs to do is make it very clear that there's going to be less ideology and more of a focus on good government, some practical measures to reassure people. And I think in terms of major reassurance, rather than having rhetoric against our neighbours, actually start focusing on how we can rebuild bridges with our neighbours and get the economy going.
So here is his economic balancing act ahead of the debt plan that is still being prepared for the coming Monday. We understand that there is a gap that needs to be bridged of between 30 and 40 billion pounds to make up for the surviving mini-budget policies and an extra economic downturn. Cuts to spending could occur in welfare, big transport investments and in government departments. But further tax rises, perhaps on wealthy pensioners, might also be on the way. The new PM will see the 2019 manifesto as his mandate for being in office, but there's a big question as to how much priorities from 3 years ago matter right now. All that is set against growing debts and possible recession, making this picture worse. And this has been the effective cost of borrowing for a 5-year loan to government, known as a gilt. It raced up during the original contest and ballooned after the mini-budget, as you can see, settling after the U-turns. And then actually today, it fell pretty sharply as Mr Sunak's coronation became clear. The Bank of England is watching carefully.
Credibility is hard won and easily lost. What we've seen, though, when you look at yields in the gilt market, is that credibility is being recovered, at least on that benchmark measure. But I think that has to be followed through. A return to the kind of stability around policy making.
Another measure is sterling. The value of the pound is still down noticeably too, and while it has recovered from the extreme mini-budget record lows, since Mr Sunak was last in government in July, the pound is down 6% versus the dollar and down over 2% versus the euro. So, big decisions for him. It's assumed he will continue with Liz Truss's £15 billion reversal of his national insurance rise. But will he continue with what was his policy as Chancellor to uprate benefits and tax credits by 10% in April, or delay a target to spend 3% of the value of the economy on defence? But even before that, will he continue with a debt plan a week today? And will Jeremy Hunt remain as Chancellor? Huw.
Faisal, many thanks. Lots of questions there that we are looking for answers for. Well, 6 years after the EU referendum and the Brexit pledges to take back control of Britain's borders, there are record numbers of people risking their lives to cross the English Channel in small boats. The issue of immigration is far from settled. And now the serious shortage of workers in areas like hospitality and social care is prompting renewed debate about employing people from overseas. Our home editor Mark Easton has been investigating.
The resort of Scarborough has enjoyed a bumper summer, with millions of visitors opting for a staycation in North Yorkshire. But many tourist businesses here are opening late and shutting early. Why? They simply can't get enough workers.
Go on, wash your face, please.
The seafront chippy's been operating on reduced hours all season, with half of its restaurant closed off to customers.
Cod chips and garden peas.
Perfect, thank you.
When I started 3 years ago, for instance, we were on eight members of staff. The best I've had this year so far is 3.
3?
3.
And that's really hitting your bottom line.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously, the sad thing is if there is people to be served, we don't have the people to serve them.
Scarborough voted decisively for Brexit and an end to free movement from the EU. But the new PM will know that since the referendum campaign, British attitudes to immigration have shifted significantly.
7 years ago, 2/3 of people told pollsters they wanted immigration to be cut. Now that figure has fallen to under a half. And at the same time, the proportion of people who say they want immigration actually to go up has risen from 7% to almost a quarter of British adults.
North Yorkshire has among the lowest unemployment rates in Britain. There simply aren't enough local people to fill available jobs, and we found very few who wanted to rule out using labour from overseas.
Thank you very much.
Like many hospitality businesses, this luxury hotel in the Dales has struggled to match people to vacancies. The owner, chairman of the local Tory Association, says it's better to recruit locally than buy in foreign staff.
What we have to do as a business is make sure we stand out in the marketplace as a good employer, somebody that it's really exciting and good and a future for people to come here and work.
Do you pay enough?
Do we pay enough? And again, it's a balance of paying the right amount. I think we pay the right amount.
This proud old Yorkshire pie company went bust earlier this month. The owners saying a key factor was a shortage of workers. More than 200 people have lost their jobs, sending a shudder through the county's manufacturing sector. Down the road at Heck, they can make 1 million sausages a day, but not without foreign labour. 2/3 of employees are from overseas, although the family-run business would love to attract more from Yorkshire.
We simply couldn't operate without foreign workers. Local people just aren't out there, unfortunately. A lot of young people in the area move to the big cities, go to university, expect to walk into a well-paid job at the end of it, but what we're saying is you can start from the production floor, learn about the business, learn about the supply chain, and you can make a good career of it.
There is an argument that Britain should wean itself off immigration as a route to economic growth. But pressure is building for the new PM to relax visa rules as the financial skies darken. Mark Easton, BBC News, North Yorkshire.
Mark, there with some of the challenges surrounding immigration. We're still talking about Mr Sunak's inbox. There's added concern for the NHS and social care in England. Health in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are matters for the devolved governments. Officials are warning that this winter could see a so-called twin-demic, that's both COVID and flu. And while all this is happening, of course, we're talking about waiting lists and staff vacancies at record levels. Our health editor Huw has this assessment of the path ahead.
Winter's not fully set in, but the NHS is already under severe strain and facing its own state of emergency, a potential nightmare for the new Prime Minister. Hospital and ambulance delays are likely to top the in-tray. In September, a record number of patients in England, 29%, had to wait more than 4 hours in A&E before being treated or assessed. A&E units are overcrowded because beds can't be found on the wards, and that's because it's a struggle to discharge patients who are medically fit back into the community.
The current situation is absolutely gridlocked, where people are stuck in many different places where they shouldn't be, not getting access to the care they need. And we know that 500,000 people are waiting for a care package, waiting for social care.
Social care is seen as a major cause of hospital delays, but why? Well, currently there are 165,000 vacancies in adult social care in England, and staff shortages help explain why only 2 in 5 can leave hospital when they're ready to do so. And added to that, there is a lack of funding for residential or home care.
Local authorities tell us that they don't have the funding to make sure that the fees they pay the social care sector are sufficient for us to be able to employ and sustainably retain people and value the workforce in the way that we would like.
The backlog of planned treatments and operations is clearly another challenge for Rishi Sunak. The waiting list in England is now 7 million, or more than 1 in 8 of the population. Mr Sunak said during the leadership campaign he wanted to set up a task force to speed up eliminating one-year waits and cutting the backlog. But that will be a big ask.
There are 2 things that could work in the benefit of the government. One is that demand doesn't go up quite so much. Some of the forecasts were very high, they don't seem to be materialising. The other is that NHS can either deal with its own vacancies, which looks very unlikely, or might be able to get productivity up at least a bit, at least to try and turn the tide on those rising waiting times. But the chances of really significant reductions by the time of the general election are incredibly small.
Then there's the thorny issue of NHS funding. The budget for England next year is £157 billion. That was announced when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, with him suggesting it was generous. So how does it look now?
But that budget was set when inflation was much lower. Now, like other organisations, the NHS is faced with escalating costs and continuing COVID-related spending like infection control. Health chiefs say the money currently on the table won't be enough, and they might even have to cut back some services. But they'll come under more pressure to make the NHS more efficient.
Pay is hitting the headlines. Today the GMB union launched a ballot on strike action for ambulance staff, and nurses have already started voting on industrial action. Health is a devolved issue, so Mr Sunak won't be alone when it comes to solving pay disputes across the NHS in the UK's nations this winter. Huw Pym, BBC News.
Well, as we've heard, Rishi Sunak will become the first British Prime Minister of Indian origin, the first Hindu to hold the office. And as we've also established, his victory came on the evening of one of the most important days in the Hindu calendar, festival of Diwali, which is a national holiday in India. Let's speak to our correspondent in Delhi, Rajini Vaidyanathan. Rajini, tell us about the reaction there.
Well, Huw, there's a huge sense of pride here in India, and one news channel here said that Rishi Sunak had given the entire nation a Diwali gift. Now, Rishi Sunak's ties to India run deep, not just through his grandparents who were born in pre-partition Punjab, but of course his wife, who is Indian, and her father, Narayana Murthy, is one of the country's best-known businessmen and a billionaire. Now, tonight, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered his congratulations to Rishi Sunak and said he looked forward to working closely with him and to implementing that roadmap to a UK-India trade deal. Now, this year marks 75 years since India gained independence from British rule. And for some people, today's news is also seen as a landmark moment through that prism. As one news channel put it, history has come full circle in Britain. The sun of India rises over the empire.
Rajini, many thanks. Rajini Vaidyanathan there with the latest thoughts in Delhi. Time is 5 to 7 on this extended edition of BBC News at 6. We've established, of course, that Rishi Sunak's been elected Conservative leader. Not formally Prime Minister yet. For that to happen, he has to visit His Majesty the King and be installed as Prime Minister. That'll probably be tomorrow. But to find out for certain, let's join Chris Mason again, our political editor. What are the arrangements, Chris?
Well, Huw, we've just got a sense now of the timetable for tomorrow. And yes, it will be tomorrow that Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister. So at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Liz Truss will chair her final cabinet meeting. Shortly after that, she will leave Downing Street for the final time as Prime Minister. We expect at around about 10:15. She will address the country from the podium in the street. Some departing words just a handful of weeks after her opening arriving words. She will then travel to Buckingham Palace for an audience, a meeting with the King, in which she will resign as Prime Minister. Shortly afterwards, Rishi Sunak will arrive at the Palace to be asked to form a government by the King, and after that he'll return to Downing Street for the first time as Prime Minister. We expect to hear from him in the street, in Downing Street, as Prime Minister just after 11:30 tomorrow morning. He will become the youngest Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool in 1812. And what a moment of triumph it will be for him just weeks after his defeated by the very person he will be replacing. Now, Liz Truss will no doubt tell him that honeymoons have rather gone out of fashion in politics. He will not get one, because the challenges he will face are colossal, because the country's challenges are colossal.
Indeed, Chris, many thanks again. Chris Mason there, our political editor, with thoughts looking ahead to tomorrow's likely events in Downing Street. 3 minutes to 7, let's go to Ben, who's got the weather for us. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Huw. Thank you. Good evening. After the drama of yesterday's weather with its vicious thunderstorms, drenching downpours and damaging winds, today, well, it's been a bit more bog standard, more common or gardens, sunshine and showers. As you can see from the radar picture, those showers have been quite well scattered. There have been big dry gaps in between, and actually most of those showers will fade as we head through this evening into the night. One or two will continue, but most places will be dry. There could be a few mist patches down towards the southeast, and a little cooler than last night, but this certainly isn't cold for an October night, 7 to 12 degrees. Tomorrow it's another sunshine and showers day. Those showers quite well scattered. Could crop up just about anywhere, but perhaps most especially across western and northern parts. And then through the afternoon, cloud will thicken and some heavy rain will push in across the southwest of England and parts of Wales. Temperatures 14 to 18 degrees. We'd expect something more like 11 to 16 at this time of year, so we are a few degrees higher than we should be. It's this big area of low pressure that is driving things at the moment and will continue to do so through this week. Some further rain at times, but it's also sucking up some warm air from a long way south. These orange colours surging northwards across the UK. That will cause the temperatures to climb as the week wears on. Some heavy rain clearing northwards on Wednesday across Scotland. Sunshine and heavy showers and a blustery wind. In fact, wind gusts of 40 to maybe 50 miles per hour around some western coast. But it is a south or southwesterly wind, so it'll feel warm. Temperatures perhaps up into the low 20s Celsius. We could be looking at highs of 21 or 22 degrees across some southern and eastern areas for the end of the week, but there'll still be some rain at times, especially towards the north and the west of the UK. Huw.
Ben, many thanks. Ben Rich with the weather for us. That's BBC News at 6 on Monday, October the 24th. You can keep up with all the latest developments on BBC Online. I'll be back at 10. Hopefully I'll see you then. But for now, the news continues a little later than usual here on BBC One. It's time to join our colleagues in the nations and regions with the news where you are. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.